Hello and good day to all of you. My name is Timo Franse, and welcome to our webinar about the risk of uncertified PROFINET devices, in which we ask whether you've already had your devices certified. So perhaps you're currently developing a new PROFINET device, or you're considering updating your device and you would like to know the options. That's where you come in. It could also be that you are a user of PROFINET devices and you want to know the assurance given by a PROFINET certificate. Maybe you're simply interested in knowing how the devices are tested to meet the specific conditions of your plant. And today we are talking specifically about the certification of PROFINET devices, so please keep in mind that it is mandatory to have certified devices in your network. All products will be certified according to the conformance class that is specified, which will be discussed further on in this webinar. For end users, it's very useful to check if devices are certified before they are implemented in their networks. You may think that this rule is followed by everyone. However, there are many cases of customers where we have found that the main reason for their issue is that they actually do not follow this rule. As we move onward to our next part of the webinar, which is the importance of certification, I will hand over to Alex with a question as well. Alex, could you please give an example of this lack of certification within PROFINET devices as you take us to the next chapter?
Yes, of course, Timo. As specified, the SPI specifications are still updated regularly. Our support department had some experience with a manufacturer where the device was certified under the PI guidelines, but by the updated PI specifications, they would not conform to the latest guidelines, and therefore we found that the device was showing the LLDP data was not as expected. The device manufacturer updated the firmware of the device, and after our findings, and they solved the issue actually.
Right, so essentially, that means that you really have to, even after certification, keep the certification up to date, right?
Yes, that's correct. Especially now over the years, the guidelines are still increasing and still updated actually, and they are also expecting more of the devices, and also manufacturers must be aware of that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
All right. I believe that later in the webinar, we'll also be talking a little bit more in depth about when you have to do a full re-evaluation on your devices. But for now, I will hand over fully to Alex as he tells us about the importance of certification itself. Alex, take it away.
Thank you. PROFINET users do not need to understand the details of the communication process, but they must have the assurance that all devices in operation meet specific conditions, such as viability, determinism, and compatibility. How can I explain that? Actually, the simplest way to understand is for reliability, the device can perform the task as expected. For determinism, the frame or packet arrives when the time is expected to. And for compatibility, the device uses the same language of communication. Let's move on to the certification steps. Before the test begins, however, there are a few things you need to do. You must have your unique vendor ID, which is unique to your company. If you do not have a vendor ID, you can contact and request it from PI, and they will help you further to obtain it. Once you have the vendor ID, you can pick your own device ID code. An example is showed in the slide and how it looks in the PROFINET GSD checker. Now let's move on the testing process. These are the steps or test phases required for certification. We will go over one of the upcoming slides. Some are automatic checks, others are manual tested. The important things to know is that the device fails during one of these checks, then the device is rejected. It can be a firmware update or a redesign, many possibilities. As a certified PI test lab, we of course help the customer and offer assistance for the device improvements. As a quick example, last week I certified a device with the R tester, and the device was not coming back to data exchange after a reset to factory. I communicated the customer and facilitated the firmware update and fixed the issue. We run the test again and it all passed. Now let's move on to the GCML test.
As we do that, Alex, I actually have a quick question for a bit more clarification. As we do the certification tests, could you tell us if we always use the same test setup?
No, we use the same components as described in the PI guidelines, but under different topologies. So as an example, we use standard setup, port-to-port setup, and non-PROFINET switches. And in all test cases, we use the same test rack, but changing the cabling topologies.
All right, thank you very much. Please continue.
No problem. Now let's continue with the GCML. GCML is a general station description markup language and is a GSD in an XML format. Therefore, we use the PROFINET GSD checker, which checks the GCML and is able to edit the file. This is available from the PI website, so that the developer is able to test the GCML beforehand. The GCML contains all information and capabilities of the PROFINET device. This includes the optional features and holds all of the information about the device. The vendor ID, device ID, and the GSD file name must be identical to the registration form. Also, the device will be tested to the conformance class and network class specified in the GCML. And if all the optional features are not mentioned in the GCML, they will not be tested. As soon as this test has passed, we implement the GCML in the R tester and the TIA Porter program. The automated R tester is what does most of the test cases. The majority are automated, but a few test cases to have to be done manually. We are able to test conformance class A and B with the software, and conformance class C is tested using software like Spirita. The device on the test, as known as DUT, is described in the GSD as device access point. The depth test will check the hardware and the functionality of the state machine. There will also be some negative and integration tests done to check the behavior of the device. Looking into the software, there are many test cases. We will not go through all of them, but some of them. The DCP test will check the assignment of name and IP address, check if all options with get, set, and identify and timing. The device will also be put through some behavior tests and will also be checked on how it reacts when a factory reset is set, or what happens when the stored data is deleted, or what happens when the wrong configurations. Some topology tests will also be done, checking how the device will react to its neighbors. And this is done with PROFINET and non-PROFINET devices. Also is specified in the GCML file some optional tests like media redundancy and fast startup will be tested. This completes the R tester, but now let's continue with the security level test. The netload test, otherwise known as security level 1 test, this will test the behavior of the device according to the network load and also some security features. As security is such a concern and has become very important, the netload test is used to help improve the robustness and correct behavior when there's a security incident. The goal of the test: the relevant network load and behavior of the DUT under different loads. I will now explain the difference between normal and faulty communication. Normal communication will test the real-time communication in a normal environment. The functionality of the DUT will be unaffected. Faulty communication for excessive network loads and security attacks are done. The functionality of the DUT may lose communication, but must come back without any intervention like power cycling the device. There are 3 possible network classes. Class 1, basic robust against net load. Class 2, the standard robustness against net load. And Class 3, the advanced robustness against net load. There are 3 main types of network loads.
Actually, before we move on to that next slide, Alex, about the network, the net load classes, what happens if a new device is specified to be, for example, a class 3 net load device with advanced robustness? You do a test and you see that it can be certified, but not for class 3, maybe only for class 1.
Now, first we need to run the test at least 4 times, and the test must pass 3 times. So it can fail one time, but it should pass 3 times of them. If the test cases fail and the device have to be manually reset, the complete test will be redone. So we can always go or mention they need to be a class lower, but at least we need to test it 4 times before we can give an answer to the customer already.
All right. So what happens, for example, with the same example, right? So the customer has specified it as a class 3. You've done the test, but it only comes up with basic robustness. Can we still certify the device, or is it then not able to be certified?
At the end, the device is still certified, only with a lower class. And for end customer, it's really valuable to have in class 3. It's also a marketing point and also a better product. So I think it's worth to invest why it is in class 1 and not 3 as expected.
Yes. All right. Clear. Thank you very much.
No problem. There are 3 main types of network loads. Undirected network load, which is data that is not meant for the device but just passing by. Directed NRT load, non-real-time data sent to the specific PROFINET device. And directed PROFINET load is real-time data addressed to the specific device. This concludes the last step in the certification process. And once the device passes this test, I create a report for the customer and send it to them. They can send the report to PI, and at the end, they get a certificate from PI. Timo, could you do the last chapter for me, please?
I most certainly can. Thank you very much, Alex, for taking us through the process of testing. If we could go to the next bit, yes, I will be talking a little bit about what happens after certification and our new pre-testing service. So first, some important product changes after certification. It's very important to note that, and this is what I referred to earlier in the webinar, that when there are product changes made after a device is certified, there perhaps might have to be a full new or maybe like a partial new test. A PROFINET certificate is valid for 3 years, but it can be prolonged without a retest, and only a declaration by the manufacturer is required, but this is only as long as no changes were made. Any changes done to the device that was certified could affect the PROFINET certificate. You can also see on the slide, some changes may also require a full test, partial test, or the manufacturer's declaration that I named before, depending on what it is. For example, as you can see, new features into the device might require either a full or partial test, depending on how big the new features are. The hardware changes that influence communication need a full test, whereas hardware changes that don't influence communication are fine with just a declaration. Bug fixes in application or communication software, once again, as it tampers with communication and changes these things, need a full new test. And the PROFINET stack being changed also needs a full new test. Please keep this in mind, otherwise you'll end up with similar situations as the one that Alex sketched in the beginning of the webinar, where a product was tested but wasn't retested after changes were being made to communication parts of the device. We then go to the next slide, a little bit about brand labeling. As you all know, brand labeled products are all around, and they're functionally identical. The only real difference can be found in the housing. As you can see, there are, and in the GSDML and INM data. So as you can see, there's a couple of things that can be changed without recertifications, which are the GSDML file name, the INM records, SNMP, endpoint mapper, and some GSDML items like vendor underscore ID and device underscore ID. If you make changes to electronic hardware and layout and software or firmware, only changes to the firmware can be done without listed points. You can do that. If we then go to the next slide, thank you very much. A little bit of pre-testing. This is one of the new things that we offer in our test lab, And we do it especially in order to help developers and manufacturers. So we offer something that we call a pre-testing service, where we help you during your device development phase conform the PI specifications, avoiding you from repaying for the certification test twice. So essentially what happens is we already test the device. Yep. We already test the device before we actually do the official certification tests. This can really save you from, for example, going into an official certification test, finding out that your device won't go through it and having to wait and pay for another full certification test. With the pre-testing service, we can already tell you, hey, it'll go through the certification process correctly. It is a lot shorter, and you essentially are guaranteed that your device will be okay. So with this pre-test, we find and solve issues before the certification, and we make sure that the device is following the specifications that are necessary. For any more information on this new pre-testing service, you can either contact sales or you can contact testlab@procentec.com for any questions, for any information. With that, we have reached, I believe, the end. So first of all, please, I hope that you've been able to take a lot out of this, that you also have been able to see the importance of certifying your device and the risks that it takes, that you take when you don't. Other than that, Alex, is there anything you would like to add before I close us off completely?
No, especially the conformance testing, it sounds like just an extra option, but last week what I said, I already saw on device where he was not coming back after a reset to factory. Simple firmware update and issue solved. Just yeah, smooth process after that for the certification. So I think that is really important. So yeah, performance testing and device certification are both important. Yes.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Alex, for that addition. To the rest of you, thank you very much for attending. If there are any questions that come up after the webinar that you might suddenly think of, please feel free to email us, contact us, and we will get in touch and answer your questions for you. Any other inquiries about certifying your devices, please contact testlab@procentec.com. And once again, Alex or one of our other colleagues will happily help you certify your devices. As we've learned today, that is very important. Thank you very much for your time, for your attention, and I hope to see you all very soon. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.